And so here's the third movement, Rasch und mit Feuer, which means fast and with fire. You can see obviously the English word rash. We sometimes say if someone's actions have been rash, that maybe there's some correlation there etymologically between those two words. But I think it has such a great feel about it, the German there, Rasch und mit Feuer, and it really gives you an idea of the energy and the propulsion of this third movement rather. So you can see how the energy is building from our first movement. So whatever the fantasy was in the first movement, which is quite sort of brooding and dark and quite sorrowful and anguished, and then we have this more light-hearted, playful, but something under the surface still with that piano accompaniment. And here in the third movement, we turn to, I think, sort of a heroic, almost heraldic kind of feel. Like the Jack is well and truly out of the box. But the interesting thing about this movement is that Schumann is constantly arresting this forward motion, this kind of sense of propulsion. We never really quite make a sort of perfect cadence and a real sense of finality until, quite appropriately, right at the end of the movement. So right from the beginning, we have this rushing figure where we've got triplets again in the piano part, in counterpoint with duplets in the clarinet. And the thing that's interesting here is how tricky this is to start, because as you can see, nobody plays at the very beginning of the bar. Now usually we would kind of have a cha-cha-cha, but here there's a real sense that this is the place that we're aiming for. It's rushing into this sforzando chord on the second bar. And when you've got duplets and triplets against each other, that's quite a tricky thing to manoeuvre, but particularly when the beginning part of the rhythm is missing in both instruments. So we have to kind of really carefully communicate what pulse we need, we're intending, so that we arrive in perfect synchronicity. It's almost like kind of you've got two acrobats tumbling onto the stage in a gymnastics show, and they fantastically arrive after their jumps and tumbles together, landing perfectly on their feet together simultaneously at this point here on the second bar. And the left hand here, this is where all the propulsion is. Again, this triplet figure, this arpeggiated figure that's met with this dotted figure that we had earlier in the piece. And again, we have this interesting marking of kind of having ja. It's hard to see on this piano score, but we have staccato, quaver chords, marked forte, and then reiterated with a forte. And they're obviously separate in the piano part here, but if you look at the clarinet part, interestingly, it's slurred over. I've often wondered about this, about whether actually whether this is exactly the right way to do this, ta-da-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-da-tee-da, or to ya-da-da-da-da-dee. But the idea is that there's a real sense of rinforzando reinforcing this kind of slightly hammer blow feel. It's not maybe as hard as a hammer blow, but it really feels like there's a sense of confidence, and it's like, so there, and so it goes off again and again with that triplets against duplets going on, and then we have, as I was just talking before, we have these large intervals that we have when we're being expressive in this kind of period. And here, this expressive leap, this big leap here, that's really quite high and quite expressive. A top F on an A clarinet, it's a concert D, but we want it to always be as beautiful as possible. And again, this rushing figure, if we look in here in bar 17, we can see the same thing from the beginning. There's our octave, expressive octave. And again here, the A to the A. Again, just look for the chromaticism. We've had so much of that in this piece, in this Ti-dum, ti-dum, ti-dum. And then, so that's taking us back to the opening. Then in the second time bar, it's more of an abrupt finish. Now, most people rush into this, and I think there needs to just be a little bit of a moment, a bit of a comma here, because we have this change of key. So we've been in A major, and now we go to C major. A minor. I beg your pardon. So from A major back to A minor, which is the key of the opening. And for all of this sort of heroics and positive energy that's been flowing through this third movement, we suddenly find ourselves back kind of in the world of the first movement, suddenly back down to piano, and we have just these little stings of emotion on these 40 pianos or sforzando pianos. The thing to notice here, we've got a forte piano here and then an accent. So this one should be more sustained, if you ask me. This C is a bit more ba, and the B flat is ti da 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 dum. You could almost have this sort of marking that Schumann liked so much before, but he chooses not to use that here, so it's not such a big moment of expression. So things that feel quite similar to the first movement is this sort of sense that we go up to this high E flat again as being the note that we're striving for. There are lots of parallels, and you can see that the melody is doubled in the left hand of the piano. So it's kind of like a duet between the left hand of the piano and the clarinet. And then we have a second part of this, again, which kind of stays with the same sort of feeling, but just moving up in our key center, if you like. So here we've got E at the bottom, and this minor third here, chromaticism. This all feels like it's in that first movement again. And then we have this wonderful device that Schumann uses in the piano part, which it's really hard to sort of see, but we have these acciacchituras and sforzandos that are just out with each other by a fraction of a beat. That sound is a terrible way of describing it by trying to sing it, but listen out for this moment here when we're playing this long note in the clarinet. Now, there's an interesting thing here. Schumann has written in a crescendo here, and I know that when I find I'm playing this, I actually almost want to kind of do the opposite, to kind of aim in my phrasing all the way through to here. So ta di da dum pa da da dum ta ya di dum ta di da yum, because there's a crescendo here in the piano part to kind of go towards this slightly unexpected chord here, yum, boom 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 boom, and then diminuendo through here. Now that's probably controversial. It's not what Schumann wrote, but it's one of those things that it feels like this is very much the place that we're aiming to arrive at with this unusual chord, where we've got the diminished chord with the B at the bottom, so it's B, D, F, and G sharp, and then we find our way back to the A minor bit here. So that's just something about personal interpretation. It's not. It doesn't make sense to me that there's this arrival on the B, and then the clarinet sort of surges through, and then what? What do we go through to? It doesn't say dynamically what's going on, but it sort of crescendos, and then there's sort of this grey area here, and I'm not quite sure what's supposed to happen. Whereas if we arrive at this point and there's a sort of a gradual diminuendo or release of energy through those two bars back down to the piano that both clarinet and piano have, that seems to work better for me. But that's I'm sure there'll be lots of purists who will come up with a better answer as to why what Schumann wrote makes sense. So we have this music again, and then once we've done a repeat of this, we have a rushing figure once more. This time, instead of it being 3s against 2s, we've got this sort of semiquavers implied, because between the hands. And we're back again with our recapitulation here. And again, we're back in this heroic feel, and we're all of the music is repeated from the A section that we had before. And then there is just this sort of, as you can see, the coda that's marked here. So having restated all the music from A with slightly different feel with these semiquavers that are going on in the piano part here, in addition to all of the triplets. And then in the coda we have this sort of, this drop right back down in dynamic that we want to observe, where the energy, we want to kind of drop back down again in order to do one final big push all the way to the end. So we have the coda, which drops down, and this is where the texture changes. So the piano is now even more energized, more active, and it's positive energy. We're in the major, we're back in A major, so this semiquaver figuration that you have all the way through here, through to the end, the propulsion is sort of headlong, but it starts with sort of, it's quietly, quietly coiling the spring, if you like. So if the jack and box was out at the beginning of the movement, we're trying to put the jack back in the box so that we can have yet another explosive ending. So it sort of builds and builds and builds. So you can see here sort of A, B, C sharp, D, and so it keeps winding up. Schneller means faster. So we've got our divided hands semiquavers here again. So again, we've got these two moments, these arrested back to the seventh that we had in the second movement, the ninth that we had in the second movement, chromaticism, and we're not expecting this seventh chord, which C7, which takes us back to that. We have this sort of sense of C to F, so we've got C here and we have F here again, and faster again, and then this is just the final flurry, chromaticism in the clarinet part, and then this final headlong kind of whoosh with these amazing kind of, and those chords that we had at the end of each movement, again, the sense of finality finishes off what is, to my mind, one of the best, most concise and idea-packed pieces for clarinet and piano, maybe even of the Romantic period itself. It's a joy to have had this piece written for the clarinet by a master of lyricism and poetic expression. Obviously, cellists often play this as well, and that gives it a very different feel. I'm sure there are lots of interesting comparisons to be made if, as clarinetists, we go and listen to cellists playing, and similarly for cellists, if they listen to the way that us clarinetists breathe and phrase things using the air. So I hope that's been useful. That's my guide to things to look out for when preparing Schumann's Fantasiestücke. Hopefully you'll join me again for another adventure together.